Look, hi everyone. Super happy to be here. As Giles already indicated, my name's Simon Weller, and he even found a very flattering photo of me from a corporate website that makes me look at least 10 years younger. So thank you, Giles. I really appreciate that. So look, as Giles indicated, what I'm here to do really is to set the mood a little bit. This is a super exciting event. This is the first time we've all been together since 2019. And obviously it's been a very 2 or 3 years, including our families. And what I really wanted to do was really reflect a little bit on what we've achieved in 10 years, because I'm not sure how many of you realize this. I know a few of you will, since after reading through the CloudStack notes go to the board every quarter, I noticed a few interesting names that were present almost back when the project was first started. So I want to point out the person who's actually at this conference who probably has the longest tenure on the project management committee is Guido. So Guido, if you're in the room, put up your hand here. Congratulations, you're the oldest PMC member, which is fantastic. And I would be amiss if I didn't also mention Dan and Wei as well, who were very early on there. And obviously Giles is on there very early, and if I've missed anyone else, I do apologize. But it's just fantastic that we have such longevity in the project. And ultimately, this project would not exist if it wasn't for people who are willing to put a lot of their time in there, right? And so a lot of my focus today is going to be on where we've come from, a little bit of marketing intelligence about where we were, where we're going, and then kind of focus a little bit as well on some ideas about how we continue to evolve. Because in the end, if projects like CloudStack don't evolve, we die, right? That's just a fact. You look at the typical cycle of a modern tech company, and we're seeing this unfold before our eyes right now with Twitter and Meta and others who are suddenly having to do massive downsizings after being seen as being incredibly high-growth companies for many years, right? So really think about, as I go through this, think about how you can contribute more, not just in terms of code and support, but in terms of ideas, right? Because ultimately, as a community, we're capable of actually introducing a lot of our own ideas, our own thought process into the future of the project, because we die unless we think very carefully about what our needs are in terms of the future of the project. Does that make sense? So I thought it would be kind of fun to go through a few key milestones. You know, back in April of 2012, Citrix gifted CloudStack to Apache, which is, of course, really the birth of the overall project. And as we continue on there, we had our first board report in May of 2012, the first Apache release in November 26 of 2012. So a huge amount happened very quickly in the first year. And then beyond that, you know, we formed the first project management committee, and Chip Childers, who some of you I'm sure know, was our first VP. We became a top-level project well, I misspelled that, in March of 2013. And then our first collab conference under the actual officially top-level Apache project was in Santa Clara, and the second one was in Amsterdam, right? As Giles pointed out, there was one in Las Vegas prior to that, but that was before we were a top-level project. We had 100 committers by March of 2015, our 10th major release in September of 2017, and very recently on June the 7th of 22, 4.17 came out, and as I'm sure you're very much aware, one of our colleagues will be talking about that next, which is very exciting and continues the evolution of the overall project. And of course, November 14th, 2022, we're finally here, which is a very exciting milestone. So what was happening back in 2012? Right, seems like a long time ago. I mean, how many of you remember what you were doing in 2012 in any kind of detail? I certainly don't. I think maybe that's me getting old as well. But in the end, cloud was a different project back then, a different type of thing, right? Infrastructure was the focus back in 2012. AWS was number one. A company called Rackspace, which isn't very popular anymore, was number two, right? And then beyond that, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, IBM, and Oracle only were just thinking about starting services. Just think about that for 1 second. When you think about who dominates the market today, right? Obviously, it's AWS and Azure, and probably Google Cloud is a third on that list. But considering they didn't have any product to sell by 2012, shows you what's happened over the last 10 or so years, right? PaaS and SaaS were just emerging from the typical ASP a lot of us were selling back in the 90s. We were starting to see companies trying to embrace the idea of the cloud. What could we do to scale better? What could we do to generate more revenue and ultimately more gross margin? Oracle was using single tenant instances of applications. They hadn't figured out the cloud at that point in time, so what were they doing? They were throwing it in there in a single instance and calling it a cloud product, right? So a lot of us were doing that back then, my companies included, to be quite honest with you, right? GitHub received their first $100 million investment. How many of you know GitHub, small company? No, not a very wide berth these days, right? Facebook, ServiceNow, and Workday went public, right? So a huge amount happened in 2012. I think what's also interesting is that this is really when the private cloud market started to evolve, right? We had some of the legacy players. I'm calling legacy players mainly because they were single source management hypervisor platforms rather than orchestrators. So we had the VMwares of this world. They just acquired their first major company, Nicira, for SDN. I'm sure some of you remember SDN. In fact, CloudStack has a plugin still for Nicira today. I'm not sure if it's well used, but it's certainly still there. Citrix Zen Server was really the main competitor to VMware at the time. OpenStack had started in 2010. They had a lot of backers after originally getting a lot of their code from Nebula, which I believe was open sourced by NASA back then. And then a lot of people got behind it, right? Huge backers, tons of cash, big marketing machine, right? We've seen just copious amounts of money thrown at that project over the years, but not necessarily the kind of adoption and consistent adoption that we've seen with CloudStack, which I think is probably a great indicator of why community is so important, right? You build a really strong community and you have the ability to grow, right? Which is one thing that you're going to see me coming back to on a regular basis here. And OpenStack was very complex. Open Apache CloudStack, right? Community-driven, Apache structure, multi-hypervisor, and probably one of the biggest and most important things, it was easy to deploy. Hence, we got very rapid growth very quickly. And then, of course, we had a splattering of others. But just think about how many of those others really haven't got a lot of market share today. Things have changed. You know, the market changes and evolves. And the key here is that any project has to evolve with the market or you die, right? Not a massive fan of Gartner, but I think they have a very interesting project called the hype cycle. And what the hype cycle really indicates is whether the technology in question is right at its infancy, whether it's at the peak of inflated expectations, as they say, which really means how highly marketed and hyped is something, but not necessarily in alignment with their expectations. The trough of disillusionment, when people finally realize, I hate this, this is misery, it doesn't work, I need to find something else that does work, right? And the slope of enlightenment, when people start to figure out, wow, maybe this does actually have a use, but we don't quite know how to use it yet, but we're trying to get there, right? And finally, you have the plateau of productivity. When something's stable, it's considered well-tested, it's fairly easy to deploy, or there's a good ecosystem around that deployment, and there's an opportunity for it to grow over time, right? This is the hype cycle from 2012. You'll notice a couple of kind of interesting things up here. So right here we have private cloud computing, which of course we know very well, application PaaS as well. And then general cloud computing was down here. Public cloud storage was down here. But you'll notice there were a lot of other very interesting products and services that we see today that were being pretty well hyped at that point in time now. Some of them are still around, some of them are not, right? So as we move on a little bit here and look at the hype cycle for this year, we see a lot of changes, right? We don't really see a lot of infrastructure services anymore because, quite frankly, they're all the way out in the plateau of productivity. Everything's great, right? You've got infrastructure. You can get infrastructure from anyone these days, really, right? Whether it's public or private cloud, you can build your own. You can go to AWS, you can go to Azure, you can go to DigitalOcean and a plethora of other companies. So, you know, it's kind of aged out. Everyone knows what it is. They're very comfortable with it. But what you will notice here is some of the new hype stuff. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term cloud native, right? Right now, that's at the top of the peak of inflated expectations, right? So you'll see as well down the bottom here, there's a great, sorry about that, there's a great line here It gives you an indication of when they think the plateau might be reached for these, right? So cloud native right now is in the 5 to 10 years of expectation. But what I wanted to point out with the slide as well is that the vast majority of these products and services that you see listed here, they're really over the top, right? They're assuming you already have the infrastructure, right? They're assuming that you may not have the expertise, so you need someone else to do it for you, right? And we've seen a huge evolution in the last 5 or 6 years where a lot of companies, I think, in a negative way, have got rid of a lot of the infrastructure people that really knew how to build this stuff. And so it kind of forces more people into having to consume services, right? So as we move on here, so in the end, what has really changed? You know, there's a huge focus in public cloud infrastructure right now on abstracted services, right? What can you buy from them that they can find it easy and monetize and is far stickier, right? Hyperscalers really are focused on stickiness and lock-in because there's a lot more competition than there used to be. We used to have 2 or 3 players. Now we have a plethora, probably 20 or 30 players in each different geographic market. Obviously, some are bigger than others, but in the end, they have to try and figure out how to keep you in there, right? As every business does. We're all looking for stickiness in our own businesses to a degree, right? Challenges are, right, a lot of these solutions are complex. They are capitalizing on the lack of talent that you have in your organizations or that your customers might have. The thing is, though, that infrastructure is still very profitable. In fact, I pulled a stat from our public information from DigitalOcean last week where they reported 58% gross margin on infrastructure, right? Just think about that for a second, right? About all this new fancy stuff, but you know, there's plenty of companies still making huge money just on basic infrastructure, right? So the point here is, it's very easy to get caught up in the hype curve, right? But think about ultimately, as a project, what we need to be supplying to our customers to be successful and to grow ultimately, right? There's a lot of competition and easy to churn as well in infrastructure. But the fact is, if you provide great support to your customers, why do they want to leave you, right? The biggest reason for leaving isn't necessarily always money. It's quite often because they feel that there's not enough love, right? They want the support, right? The other thing that I think is very interesting, and this plays into that hype cycle as well, is that we're seeing a lot of hybrid defensive plays. Now, all of us in this room who've been involved in cloud for a long time know that hybrid is a word we've been throwing around for at least a decade, maybe longer. But what is very interesting, if you look at all the major vendors out there, especially the large cloud vendors, they're all talking about hybrid now. Hybrid was a swear word 3 or 4 years ago, right? None of them wanted to know about it. And the simple reason they didn't want to know about it is that it basically allowed and suggested that you should rip your services from their cloud and put it in your own, right? But now we're seeing them talk about it. And you're probably questioning, well, why would that actually be happening, right? I think in the end, what's starting to happen is that they're losing customers, right? And that's a natural progression over time for any business, and you have to adapt. And so what they're doing is saying, well, if we can't have the infrastructure, maybe we can have the services, right? How can we let our customers run our PaaS and SaaS services on their infrastructure and give them more ability to scale, right? So it's a natural progression. So this is a little market projection insight from a company called Markets and Markets that does a lot of analysis in cloud. And they like talking some very big numbers here. They're suggesting that the cloud market, cloud computing market, platform market is going to be $545.8 billion US this year, right? That's a lot of money. But they're also projecting by 2027 that will be about 1.2 trillion US dollars, right? With a common annual growth rate of 17.9%. So if you're not familiar with what CAGR means, think of it as how your money compounds in your bank account over time. That's really what they mean by CAGR, right? The growth rate over time. I think what's very interesting here, and I highlighted it right down the bottom, if you look over here, was that they're attributing a lot of this growth to hybrid. And you wouldn't typically have seen that a couple of years ago, right? But they're thinking the market's changing once again, right? So once again, the large providers are having to adapt, which I think is very interesting, right? So in the end, am I going the wrong way here? Yes. In the end, the question is public cloud losing its luster? Well, I don't really think it is, but I think that there are a lot of people starting to think about other creative ways they can grow their business in addition to utilizing public cloud, right? So as I already mentioned, I mean, the hyperscalers, they're starting to refocus their product offerings a little bit. So we're seeing more edge computing, right? AWS is doing it. Azure's offering is effectively a cloud-in-the-box style offering. They're even doing this with telecom companies right now. So very recently, Microsoft bought a company called Metaswitch, which is originally based out of the UK. They sell voice soft switches and very, very expensive equipment providing voice over IP services and conferencing services. They actually embedded that company in their edge computing platform. So now what they want to do is they don't just want to sell you pure public cloud. They want to sell you infrastructure in a box, right? So you put their servers in your data center, run their software, everything's great, right? We're seeing more plays with PaaS or SaaS on your infra, right? So we've got a presentation in the next couple of days from AWS about OpenSearch, right? That's a great example, right? They're looking to see how can they take their products and services and put them on your info, right? So it's a nice example of a pseudo-hybrid play, right? And growth focus through hybrid market messaging. So if you look today at, say, Google's site, you'll notice that they have massive documentation around why hybrid is a great idea. Once again, just an example, the market is evolving over time, right? The thing is that there are some larger companies out there with deep pockets who started figuring out that, well, look, public cloud serves certain markets, and that's great, but we think that we can do it better or another way, right? It's not always better, but it could be a more creative way. So very recently, I think last year, Dropbox, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Dropbox, right? They decided that it was costing them too much, and this was a pure play around spend, and they ripped out their products and services from some public clouds and saved $75 million by insourcing infra, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of money, right? And even more recently, in fact, about 2.5 weeks ago, 37 Signals, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them or not, but they are well known, especially in North America, for a project management application called Basecamp, which a lot of people have used, and called Hey, which is very, very similar to some of the Atlassian tool suites. And they decided that they were also going to pull out a public cloud. So a good quote from that one was they were spending about $500,000 a year just on the database infra to support their Hey product, right? And the quote there from David Hansen was, how much hardware, basically paraphrasing here, but how much hardware could I buy for $500,000 a year, right? I mean, it's a fair question to ask, right? Now, the thing is, you have to remember that these companies have a lot of developers, they have a lot of infrastructure experts, they can do this kind of stuff, right? And it might make sense for them. Doesn't make sense for everyone, but it's just a different way. Another example how the market is just starting to evolve over time, you know? So moving on, you know, why are some of these companies looking at this stuff? And nothing here is new, right? We all know about this stuff, but it helps inform how we as a community fit into the play and what we can provide to our customers. So first of all, classic stuff, right? Unpredictable costs, right? How do you model it? It's easy when you're small, but suddenly when you add 1 million customers or 2 million customers, what are you going to do then, right? Are you in growth mode? Is your goal to sell your organization, right? You're going to IPO? Then you probably don't care about the underlying cost that much, right? Because it's all about revenue, right? You're driving revenue, especially for your software product. I mean, up to probably 3 or 4 months ago when the market started to crash, most companies who had SaaS products selling them were 8 times revenue. Just think about that for a second. 8 times revenue. They don't care about the EBITDA at all, right? It's all about revenue. So therefore, you don't care about the cost, right? So that's a typical good play probably for using a public cloud environment, right? Interestingly enough, recent HashiCorp Forrester survey, so all of you are familiar with HashiCorp, I'm sure. So they actually paid Forrester, a very large company that specializes in information gathering and surveys, to actually find out from their customers what they were spending, right? And they found that 94% of enterprises are over budget in their cloud spend. And what was quite fascinating about this is the over budget numbers range from 20 to 44%. That's a very, very significant amount of your OpEx spend, if you think about that, right? If you're that much over, right? And OpEx is typically what drives profitability, or at least cash flow proxy at most companies. New compliance challenges. I mean, how many of you today are working in the EU? Obviously, we're in the EU right now. So how many of you actually work in the EU and have to be GDPR compliant? Just show of hands. How much of a pain in the ass is it? Right? It's tough, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad law at all, but it pushes a lot onto the service provider, right? So you have to be thinking about how to do that. It hasn't quite started in North America yet, but it's coming. California and New York have similar laws that are currently modeled on the GDPR, so it's going to be coming down the line pretty soon. And so suddenly, right, can you be GDPR compliant, or if you're in the services industry around healthcare, you've got different laws to consider as well. Are you actually capable of being compliant with a cloud provider in the way that you feel you need to be to offset your risk? It's a fair question to ask, right? Are you meeting any emerging security requirements? I mean, I'm sure we're all sick of hearing about the number of companies being hacked, right, of late, and the ransomware nightmares that they have, but the fact is it's a huge risk to all of our businesses today. Right, it takes one person to click a phishing link, right, and suddenly you could be compromised. So you have to be thinking about that stuff as well, right? If you have your applications in the cloud, does that make it harder or easier for you? It depends on your organization, obviously, right? And I think one of the biggest ones is lack of control and limited visibility. And if you're a larger enterprise that can count your money in seconds, right, of downtime, then if you're not getting the uptime that you need, then that might be another reason, right? So in the end, I mean, to summarize all of this up is that flexibility isn't as important when you're really big, but reliability and business profitability is, right? When you're small, that's okay. I mean, you can deal with a little bit of downtime. You can absorb the challenges if you can scale rapidly, but you're going to get to a point of time where reliability and your need to be profitable is the most important thing of all, right? So I wanted to kind of do a real quick case study on this small company called RIM back in the day. How many of you own Blackberries back in the day? Few? All right, I had two of them. I had one work one and one, I looked silly. It looked like I had two, guns or something on my belt, right? I had two different phones on me, right? So back in 2009, September, in fact, of 2009, you'll notice here that RIM owned 42.6% of the market, and this was very shortly after, of course, Apple launched their first iPhone, right? And I'm sure a lot of you bought it back then too, right? Apple had 24% of the market, Microsoft 19, Palm 8, right? Remember them from back in the day, right? And Google at the time only had 2.5%, right? It's Android, right? So if we move forward here to a little bit later, in fact, 2013, September of 2013, right? Android had 51.8%, Apple had 40.6%, Blackberry had 3.8%, and Palm doesn't exist anymore, right? That's a pretty shocking timeline to lose half of the entire North American market, right? So let's look at the global numbers. So this is 2007 to 2016 by quarter. So back in first quarter of 07, really when companies were, I think tech companies were probably embracing the technology at the time, others weren't, but there was a bit of a growth curve here. They had about 7-8%, I would say, of the market. And then if you look around 9 and 10 here, they reached up to almost 20% of the global market share. Yet by 2014 and 15, they had no market share. Just think about that for one moment. If you owned a company and you went from the largest player in the business cell phone market in the world to nothing in 5 years, that wouldn't be that great, would it? Right? So why? Why did that happen? RIM didn't innovate. They had, if you guys remember, they had the Blackberry RIM server at the time. They were 100% focused on enterprise. Right? They didn't care about the consumer market. They didn't think there was a consumer market. Their belief at the time was that why would a consumer pay $500 or $800 for a phone? That's never going to happen. They just want a phone for making cell calls and this thing called SMS, right? Text messaging. They don't want anything. Why would someone want to browse the web with their phone? It's only good for email, right? That's really what RIM was thinking about, right? They were so focused on on the enterprise market, they completely missed the signal that companies were trying to figure out how they could actually reduce their money, their spend, right? And what were these companies doing? Okay, we're no longer going to give you a phone, right? We're going to instead move to bring your own device. We're going to put an app on the device, right? So that was a huge market shift in a very short period of time, right? Thing is that Apple and Google, Android at the time, they were thinking about the consumer. They were consumer companies, right? How could they build their market share? Well, first of all, we're going to build really flashy features on our phones. We're going to focus on the software. If we make it flashy enough and make it a status symbol, then people won't care that much about the price. We can just keep pushing the price up, right? So they front-loaded the price for all their services into their hardware, right? Built great software around it, and then monetized on the backside with ads and on people's data, but no one really was paying any attention at the time, right? So it was a big shift in how these services were being monetized. Hardware was being commoditized. Software was king. Touch screens were the future. I know it was, I don't know about you guys, but when I got my first touchscreen phone, it was kind of painful. I liked the keyboard, and then, I think all of us of that era had to adapt a bit. But the young folks who were buying these phones didn't care. They thought the touch screens were fantastic, right? And they didn't mind getting RSI in their fingers, trying to push through it. So, I mean, what an incredible transformation to the down period of time, right? So how do we apply this to ourselves, to CloudStack, right? Number one thing is you have to listen to your customer base. And when I say customer base here, I don't just mean paid customers, because our community are as much our community as they are our customers, right? We have to understand where the market's shifting, right? What are our customers' needs? What are they actually asking for? And what are they actually willing to invest in? They're two different things, right? My current company works in the education market very heavily. And I've come up with my team, a lot of great ideas. And the school systems we work for have said, that would be awesome. We'd love that. And then we say, well, could you figure out how to pay for that? And it was, well, actually, no. I'd love it, but I can't figure out how to pay for it, right? So sometimes we have to dig a little bit deeper into some of the feature requests that our customers and community is asking for. Is it sustainable, right? That's always a really big question. In the end, right, it's always easy to rest on our laurels. As I said here, to survive, we must understand our market, and we must continue to be relevant to our market. So if there's anything I want you guys to remember out of my really long and boring diatribe about the cloud market, I want you to remember the relevance more than anything else, right? As a community, if we're not relevant to the open source community and to the cloud providers and the enterprises utilizing our software, then we're not relevant to anyone anymore, right? Then we won't survive, right? Winds of change blow. Some people build walls, others build windmills, right? So what are our strengths? First of all, security compliance posture, right? That's always been a big one. We have it in our own data centers. We can control those data centers. The physical security isn't the same problem as it might be if it was in someone else's data centers. It's easier to get some of the compliance certificates that you might need. SOC 2, for example, or something like that. It's much harder to do that in someone else's infrastructure, right? Data sovereignty is a massive thing, right? Especially in emerging markets where they don't trust the Americans or others, right? And I don't blame them, to be quite honest with you, right? I mean, whoever's jurisdiction you're in at the time dictates whether your data's safe or not. Doesn't matter what your local law says, right? It's predictable. You've got scale, you can control it. Multi-hypervisor support, reliability, it just works, right? Reliability has always been a huge thing for CloudStack, right? How can we showcase our strengths? So first of all, I'd say that, Yvette and Jamie have done, obviously, a fantastic job, not just with this conference, but they have been doing just so much marketing-focused stuff for CloudStack over the last year and a half or so, and it's really changed our posture in the market, and we need to continue doing that, right? We have to invest in that kind of thing, right? Because ultimately, we have a small community in the end, a very closed community, right? We can't just assume that the market outside our small bubble really knows what we're about or where we're going. So it's part of what all of us have to do to try and push that image out there further, right? Not just talk to people about it, just really embrace others and bring them into the fold, right? Make our strengths more obvious in our messaging, right? Enablement. I think this is probably the most important slide in this entire deck here, right? Tooling is crucial. Automation is king here, right? We have to make sure that we continue to support those projects that help automate our infrastructure. Because in the end, we can't be everything to everyone, right? And I want to make that very clear here. I'm not advocating at all that we should go and do everything, because then we won't do it well, right? But we need to empower our users, the consumers of our products, to be able to go and do what they want to do with it, right? And so it really helps that heavily, right? CloudStack is an orchestrator, so let's orchestrate, not reinvent, right? It's very, very tempting for us to say, well, you know what, that project does this, but we can do it better, or we can control it better. We always have to do a little bit of analysis there in terms of whether that really makes sense or not, right? Because we don't want to get caught in that trap where we just add more and more code to the project that no one's going to support long term. Or it's just redundant. I mean, just think of all the challenges that every project already has under the Apache umbrella with security problems, right? We go and throw more code in there that isn't maybe well supported, especially in the security library space, right? Or the data parsing space, right? And we get ourselves in more trouble, right? So we always have to vet what we're doing that makes sense here. So I really think that, security compliance and data governance are probably one of the biggest drivers that we can continue to embrace for adoption through the overall project, And I think that it's still too difficult today. We need to make it easier, right? We need to make it easier to consume logs. We need to make it easier for others to add their own security apparatus on top of CloudStack, right, to make sure they can really meet the compliance requirements that they're being asked to meet by their legal entities, right? Here are a few things that community has interest in at the moment, and I want to be very clear here. I'm not advocating that we should do any of these. I'm just saying that this is where the community has interest, right? Sometimes you look at things like serverless and think, why would we do that? No, I agree. I'm not sure it's a good fit at all. But there's plenty of other Apache projects that do it well already. So maybe we can figure out how to better integrate some of those other projects via automation into a CloudStack environment without having to support it ourselves, right? Some of the stuff does make sense, right? I mean, more advanced load balancing features, probably a good example of that, or my team and another team from Germany have been working a bit on trying to bring an SDN product back to CloudStack since we lost the last one, right? But once again, we always have to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. Edge compute was one that was mentioned as well that is an interesting use case. So anyway, to kind of wrap it up here, this is 3 days of everything CloudStack, right? We have more brain power for the next 3 days related to this project than we'll probably have for a very long time, right? And that's really, really exciting. First CCC event since 2019, 42 presenters, over 300 attendees. This is an opportunity for you to develop new ideas with your peers, right? Don't be scared of getting out there and talking to a lot of people, right? Because that's where the really great ideas come. We can do more over the next 3 days than we can probably do in a mailing list in a long time. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't take it back to the mailing list. I'm just saying that this is an opportunity to incubate some of those new ideas. It's a great opportunity to network, right? You've got a whole bunch of like-minded people here that are really, really excited about continuing and pushing the project forward. So let's get creative, right? So I also want to repeat Giles a little bit here because this is super, super important. And I did remember the Shape Blue logo, Giles. But in the end, this is an extraordinarily expensive event to put on, right? And keep in mind that we're not charging a fee for anyone to attend, right? So that means that every sponsor on this list has put a lot of money into this conference. And it's super important that we support everyone. So as Giles said earlier, make sure that you talk to all the folks outside, follow up. They're all great products, great people. I know them all personally. And, really, really want to reiterate our thanks to all the sponsors. And also just wanted to recognize Yvette and Jamie and the CloudStack marketing team for putting on a fantastic event. This is a super pro event. The fact that we can do everything online as well is great. And so I want to just give Yvette and Jamie a round of applause again if we could. So last but not least, let's go. Let's make this a really great conference. Thanks.